What's going on, y'all? It's Big Facts again, coming at you with another video. So this just in the news, President Trump has ordered the withdrawal, or at least proposing the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria. Now, this right here, for the naive folks out there, this video is more so for you. Trump supporters who think so, I don't know how to put it, like, just basically have no understanding on how geopolitics is worked in the world, and who are supporting this are very, 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 very misled, okay? If the United States were to leave Syria, this will put the United States' greatest ally in the region, the Kurds, in jeopardy, okay? In jeopardy of an even deeper humanitarian crisis that they already face. Now, the Kurds, you may ask, are a ethnic group, okay? They're an ethnic group that can be found in Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. Now, these four countries that I just mentioned are very important in this situation, okay? As we all know, Syria is facing a civil war, okay? And in Syria, in the civil war, many different belligerents or even outside parties have a stake in this. And they all had a stake in this because they had one common enemy, and that was ISIS, okay? So that was Russia, Turkey, Iran, and the United States. They had one common enemy in Syria, and that was to take out ISIS, which they succeeded. Now, when that happened, okay, when they took out ISIS, each party then had their own reason as to why they wanted to stay and to, you know, basically destabilize the country, because that's what they did. All right. Now, in Syria, the Russians wanted to be in Syria basically to support the al-Assad government. OK, Bashar al-Assad, who I've discussed about in a previous video, who is a Shiite. OK, him, the Russians and Iran are basically, I guess, a tandem. And Iran also wants Bashar al-Assad to stay in power. The Russians want him in there to show that they can at least still have some sort of influence in the region, because Russia's just putting up a front. I call that country the biggest fronters in the world stage. I mean, Russia is the biggest fronter. They still think this is the 1980s where they're the USSR. Now, they've committed troops in there, and they've embedded some of their Russian troops, or they once did, into the YPG forces in Syria, you know, to help them. They actually sent over their Air Force there too to bomb some rebels, just all sorts of stuff, just to basically militarily flex their army. But they have no real purpose in that region, which is why Vladimir Putin withdrew Russian troops from that area. OK, now he claims that he did not want to, I guess, eventually accidentally attack, you know, Turkish forces or the U.S. forces in that region, because both countries have embedded, you know, their soldiers within the militant groups there. So on the outside looking at it, Vladimir Putin has a point, but truly the real reason why he withdrew his troops was because it was going to send Russia into economic ruin. Okay, with energy prices being down, Russia having the sanctions levied on them. I mean, it was just something that was just not attainable for them to do. It would have just sent them back. It would have been an Iraq situation for Russia, but even worse. OK, now, Iran is going through a cold war with the Saudi Arabians. OK, and like I stated in my previous video, Iran has to prop up Bashar al-Assad and keep him in power there, basically because they want to financially make him dependent on Iran. OK, this is so that they can keep a Shiite leader in that country, in a Sunni majority country, so that they can at least stretch influence and basically have a stronger hold over the Saudis and the rest of the Sunnis in the Arab world. OK, so that's why Iran wants to be there. They're basically in Syria just to promote their silly war that they're having, their silly Cold War that they're having with the Saudis. Now, the United States is there in Syria, basically, like the United States usually does, is to police the region. Okay, the United States' greatest ally, who have helped them in Iraq and in other areas where they find themselves, are the Kurdish people. Now, the United States have embedded their troops within the Kurdish Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF. Now, Turkey's gripe with the United States, and it has been since the Obama administration, is that They have labeled the SDF as a terrorist organization. Okay. Now, Turkey has a very large Kurdish population. As you see here, the Kurds represent about 14 to 20 million people in Turkey. Okay. 14 to 20 million Turkish people are Kurdish. That is about 25 to 30% of the Turkish population. All right. That's a very large number. And the Kurds find themselves in a very large population in Iran, which a lot of times they've been agitating for their own free nation of Kurdistan, which if Kurdistan did exist, it'll look like this, basically stretching from Turkey all the way to parts of Iran, Iraq, and Syria. But Turkey and Iran do not want that. They do not want to promote any separatist movements. The Kurds, however, the Turkish people do not want the Kurds to have their own nation, basically because the Kurds are a Sunni majority. So that's going to spell disaster, okay, for the Iranians. So they don't want that in that region. Turkey definitely does not want to have the Kurdish people to have their own nation because they will lose influence over the region, because Turkey is the bridge of Europe and Asia. Now, if I zoom out in this map, you will see why I say this. Okay, this is Turkey here. This is Istanbul, a large country, a city in Turkey. Then we have the capital Ankara. So as you can see, the peninsula, Turkey basically is a bridge between Asia and Europe, and they benefit a lot through different gas pipelines that are built through Turkey or coming through the Black Sea. So there's a lot of influence that Turkey has geopolitically by keeping their country intact. Now, when you look at a country like Adana, which is the fifth most populous city in Turkey, they have a very large Kurdish population. So that Kurdish population stretches over through the northeast part of Syria, over through the northwest part of Iraq, into Iran, in areas of Iran. So if the Kurds were to create Kurdistan, or their movements were to continue to spread, this will cause a large separatist movement in Turkey, basically sending that country into war. And that is something that Turkey cannot afford, especially when you look at the Turkish currency right now. It has been taking a shit. And let's take a look at that. You know, with inflation being as high as it is, because of the large borrowing. Well, that's just a whole nother topic in the discussion. But basically, the Turkish lira compared to the US dollar has taken a dump, okay? Has taken a dump. Turkey is basically financially ruined. When you look at it, let's zoom out of here. Look at where it has gone compared to relative to the dollar. They have basically taken a huge slide down. So Turkey basically can't afford anything. They cannot afford anything, okay? Their currency is trash. So they cannot afford losing part of their country, especially very vital parts of their country. But back to the United States influence in Syria. Like when you look here, and I want to bring your attention here to the Euphrates Dam. This is why it's important that Donald Trump keeps, U.S. forces there. When you look at this dam here, the Euphrates Dam, also known here in this region as the Al-Tapqa Dam, this supplies Syria of over half of their energy resources. This region here, in which the Kurdish forces that are backed by the United States have captured, this is actually some of the best agricultural land in the region, especially in a country that relies heavily on agriculture. So the United States actually has influence over the capital and the energy resources of this country through the Kurds. So why would you lose that economic and bargaining chip by withdrawing troops? I don't think Donald Trump understands that. This will set back the U.S. efforts in that region by years, destabilizing the region and also giving power to Turkey and their allies, which is Russia and Iran, and basically having them call the shots over here in this region, putting the United States allies, the Kurds, in a deeper humanitarian crisis that they already face. So this does not make any sense at all. At all. It's very naive of Donald Trump, because this is what provoked former Defense Secretary James Mattis to turn in his resignation, because Donald Trump tried this a year ago by trying to have 2,000 U.S. troops being withdrawn for the region. And they knew that was going to be a threat to the Kurdish people, who, by the way, the Turkish government wants to wipe out, because they're afraid of they accuse that the United States is supporting terrorist organizations. They're afraid of losing these areas, this part of Turkey, and losing their influence there. So I don't necessarily see why the United States is allowing Trump to do this. He's like a kid that has no direction. It's like a kid that doesn't have his license and is driving a car. Luckily for the United States, we have, the technocrats who really run stuff in government. So a lot of what Trump's movements and doing can be corrected. But this is just giving off an image to the United States allies that they cannot trust the United States, which down the line, it may not happen now, but down the line, when this administration leaves office, this could come back to bite the United States in the ass. All right. Where other countries will not trust the United States, cannot rely on them. OK. And this is only going to hurt the United States ally, the Saudis, too, because if Turkey comes in, they're going to partner up with the Iranians. The Iranians already want Syria to stay dependent upon them, basically fueling their Cold War and having them win. Now, the Russians, basically, I think they're just influencing Trump. Best believe that, because this is the same playbook, like I mentioned, that the Russians had took on by withdrawing their troops. Trump wants to do the same. So I think they're somewhat advising Trump, egging him on to do this, basically being that devil on his left shoulder, telling him like, hey, man, do it. But overall, it's a bad decision, a bad choice. And this is a very sensitive time, very fragile, sensitive time. All right. But I want to hear what y'all have to say. Like, comment, subscribe down below. Till next time.